makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
A few days ago, during a warm-up match between England and Romania, the England players were booed for taking a knee in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And as expected, this became a very controversial topic, with a lot of people claiming that the people who were booing them weren't really racist. They were just doing it because they see BLM as being part of a more sinister leftist agenda. So let's look at some articles and the reactions of some of the people who claim that this wasn't racist. In a BBC piece, there's an interview with some guy called Andrew, a football fan in his 40s, who said, "Booing is a way football fans can communicate dissatisfaction." He said he booed to show his objection to what he sees a, quote, identity politics agenda that focuses on black people and skin color, where as far as I'm concerned, we are all England fans regardless of color. Some genuinely seem to believe booing is an act of racism. I reject that. Other fans say the political gesture of taking the knee is detracting from the sport. If I want to watch politics, I'd switch on Westminster live. Let's see some other comments in a Daily Mail piece. Again, we are not racist, they claim. And here's some comments from the Free Speech Union, which Toby Young, one of the most vile, despicable human beings in British politics, if one can call it that. He's just a colossal asshole on every level. But he said, if the FA is going to defend the right of the players to take the knee, it ought to defend the right of the fans to respond as they see fit, whether by booing or applauding. It cannot be free speech for the players, but not for the fans. So, would he say the same with, like, racist monkey chants, which are quite common in football? In Europe, I must add. Does free speech extend to that? I would really love to know what his threshold of tolerance for free speech is. For the FA to say the gesture has no connection with BLM and is simply an expression of support for the moral cause of anti-racism is naive. For the last 5 years, the gesture has been an expression of solidarity for Black Lives Matter, a neo-Marxist political movement that wants to dismantle the nuclear family, defund the police, and end capitalism. If the England players want to take a stand against racism, all power to them, but why not do so with a less inflammatory gesture, such as standing in a circle and linking arms? If they did that, I doubt a single fan would boo. I think they would still boo, because if this linking arms in a circle was done to protest racism, the racist would still boo. They would find a reason to. That's why always, regardless of how black people protest, the racist will always say that that is too far. You know, if there is actual violence, if there's, broken windows and looted storefronts, then violence is bad. But then when it's non-violent, like simply taking the knee, as Colin Kaepernick, he was the one who started this trend back in 2016, I believe. When he does something that's completely peaceful and completely respectful, something that even a lot of veterans supported, that they did not see as offensive, that's still bad. And these are, I remind you, these are the Free Speech Union people. These are the free speech fundamentalists who should have no problem with one protesting, anything peacefully, even if it's done in the face of a national symbol, like the anthem or the flag or something like that. That is what free speech is about. Free speech, and even by their definition, should mean that there is no aspect that is sacrosanct, right? So you should have the ability to protest under any circumstance if it's peaceful, which is what they're doing. But that's clearly too far. Now I want to show the best manifestation of all these arguments in one single person, which is, of course, Nigel Farage. So let's watch what he has to say about this.
Great summer of sport coming up, which is wonderful after lockdown, all sorts going on, the Derby, the Open Golf, Wimbledon, and of course, Euro 2021, which will excite tens of millions of people in this country, as it always does. But I have a fear that Gareth Southgate, the England football manager, is putting himself out of touch with his own fans and with the country. Now look, we know he's got a lot of black players in his team. We also know that footballers receive a huge amount of abuse for whatever reason, and I've no doubt that some of it is racial and unpleasant, and
Some of it, like the monkey chants, some of it might be racist, but like there's like non-racist monkey chants too. Jesus Christ.
And the players absolutely hate it. But what Southgate has done is fallen into the trap of saying he's keener for the England players to take the knee than ever.
We are collectively really disappointed that it happened. We are totally united on it. We're totally committed to supporting each other. We feel that more than ever, we're determined to take the knee through this tournament. We accept that there might be an adverse reaction, and we're just going to ignore that and move forward.
Now,
I have to say I'm not a huge fan of the English football team, precisely because of all the racism and hooligan and just obnoxiousness of English football fans. But I really like Gareth Southgate. I think he's a really cool guy. He's a top bloke. And it's good that he's standing up to this, and he's like, well, we're not going to let a small number of people ruin the message. And I'm going to also say that I'm not a big fan of like corporate wokeness or this sort of these false expressions. I would be much more cynical if this was something that was being pushed by like the Football Association as an institution versus something that the players and the coach decided that they should be doing, because I think this is much more authentic. So let's continue watching.
the last two games, including tonight against Romania, as they take the knee before the game, the fans are booing. Is that because they're insulting the black members of the team? No, not a bit of it. It's because the great British public have sussed it. They've woken up to the fact that taking the knee to the Black Lives Matter organisation isn't about equality of opportunity, isn't about racial justice. It's about a Marxist organisation that wants to defund the police force, that wants to bring down Western capitalism, bring down our whole way of life, and replace it with a new communist order. Over 100 years ago, in Russia, class division was used as a means of fomenting the 1917 revolution and bringing about the wonderful new communist state that finished up, of course, being one of the most monstrous the world has ever seen.
Okay, so there's two things to this. The minor point that I'm going to make is he uses a fallacy, which is the slippery slope fallacy. And there's a reason why it's called a fallacy. And it's basically this idea that, well, it starts with bending the knee during a football match, and it'll end with you waking up one day, not too far in the future, under the Democratic People's Republic, the Democratic People's Stalinist Republic of Great Britain, with the communards taking over your Hampstead Heath mansion and turning it into a communal farm. That's basically the slippery slope fallacy, and he has really no evidence to back it up. That's why it's a fallacy. And the second point is the really big point. That this is the one that I'm making this video to debunk. And that is this idea that, well, we're not protesting the kneeling. We're protesting what we are describing as some ulterior, sinister agenda behind it. This, to quote Jordan Peterson, this postmodern cultural neo-Marxist agenda that it represents. That it's a threat to Western Judeo-Christian civilization, which is all the arguments that you hear among these, today's racists, because that's basically the people who are promoting these arguments. And I'm going to debunk it by basically flipping it around and saying, well, if you think that there is an ulterior motive behind this, and that's the reason why you're not supporting it, well, guess what? I now have grounds to say that you also have an ulterior, sinister motive, which is basically that you want to normalize racism, to establish a racist, fascist state. Am I not entitled to think that? Am I not entitled, if you are willing to say that this isn't really just about racism against the black players or black people in general, it's a Marxist agenda. Well, guess what? I have way more evidence, way more, to show that actually people like Nigel Farage, an actual racist, and people like him, his followers, many of which are huge football fans, hooligans, are also racist and would not object at all to establishing a fascist state where minorities are put in place, if not sent to concentration camps or killed or deported. Why? Because everything in this man's professional career has been towards that goal. So how can I not think that this is really not simply an opposition to the BLM movement, or his conception of what the BLM movement stands for, but really a manifestation of a much more sinister racist/fascist agenda, using his own logic. And the other point that I want to make is this one that the Andrew mentioned in that BBC piece, which is actually it wasn't him, it was someone else on Twitter. If I want to watch politics, I'd switch on Westminster Live. So these people always hate it when football gets involved in leftist politics, but they have no objection when football gets involved in right-wing politics. And the best example of this is the infamous Football Lads Alliance, which emerged a couple of years ago, where pretty much like the big hooligan firms banded together against counter-extremism, which is a euphemism for basically just against Islam. Because this is, Islamophobia has been the main driving force of British racism for the last couple of years. There's Tommy Robinson, also a known racist. And yeah, where was Andrew calling on Radio 1, complaining about footballers getting involved into politics this way? Why didn't he just say, hey, leave the counter-extremism to actual professional bodies and NGOs and things like that. Just stay at home and watch football. If he doesn't want politics in his football by, a couple of seconds of the players taking the knee, then he should also more vociferously oppose any other manifestation of football getting involved in or footballers, or football fans, rather, getting involved in politics, right? Let's separate the sport entirely. No, that's not what they do. Do you think these people complain when you have, again, the examples of actual racism occurring in stadiums? Do they complain about this? Of course not. Are they as vocal about this? No, of course not. So they don't care. They genuinely don't care about racism in the sport. They only care about protesting things that are anti-racist. Why? Because you are a racist. That is a fact. And I think that's all I have to say about this specific incident. But I want to also touch upon another issue, which is the different manifestations of racism between Americans and British people. And as someone who's lived in both countries, I think I have some authority to speak about this. And I'm not going to talk about like the overt racists, like the actual neo-Nazis, because I actually think, and I'm sorry if this sounds possibly a bit controversial, at least they have the balls to go out on the street with a swastika. Okay? I think the subtle racists are way worse. Not only because it's much more effective to insidiously promote racism rather than overtly, but it's incredibly hypocritical because they don't want to show themselves off as being racist, even though they are. But it's still, my point is that it's still, this subtle racism manifests itself much differently in the US than in Britain. In the US, it is somewhat more overt. And I'll give you some examples of this. So it's more overt in the sense that they use euphemisms and they use dog whistles. And I think the point is that these people are aware that they're racist. They're just using these symbols to always have something to fall back on and say, no, actually we're not racist, because like the OK sign, that's just for lols. It's just a sign. It's not really racist, even though you have, Roger Stone, a major Trump advisor, hanging out with the Proud Boys, and they're all making OK signs. Yeah, right. One of the biggest promoters of this kind of racism is Tucker Carlson, the Fox News host, whose show is basically just an ongoing dog whistle for white supremacy. And the more egregious case was happened just a few days ago. This is him basically stopping himself from saying that segregation was the best thing that's happened to the U.S. And I think that was deliberate. So watch this.
Everybody agreed that segregation was the worst thing this country ever did.
See that?
Everybody agreed that segregation was the worst thing this country.
Now, you can ascribe this to a Freudian slip, but it seems to me that most people, when like your brain malfunctions for a second, you almost like blurt it out and then retrace. Like, if I was to say that, I would be like, well, segregation is the best, worst thing. You know what I mean? Like, you kind of stumble on the words. Whereas here, he does kind of pause deliberately, and I think that was the dog whistle. I think this was entirely planned. You know, I think segregation was the worst thing. That is not really how humans talk, and that is the way that this kind of subtle manifestation of racism is commonplace in the U.S. In Britain, though, I feel it's different. I feel that a lot of Brits genuinely think that they're not racist, even though they are. And I'm going to show you a caller on the LBC. There's no shortage of like actual racist callers in the LBC trying to justify their racism. This is a guy who calls in and basically argues that he was at the stadium, he booed the players, but he's not a racism. So just listen to this and see how like the mental process works.
So Tom, what would you like to say?
Good morning. I was actually at the Riverside yesterday, and I booed the knee.
Okay. Why do you think the players are doing it?
I know the reasons that they've said that they're doing it.
So you booed that then?
No.
So you booed the reasons that they haven't said?
My undertone is that when I hear the word Black Lives Matter, I think of burning buildings in America, attacking the police and violent protests.
Yes.
So I'm not...
Have you tried not to?
Sorry?
Have you tried not to think that? Have you tried to think about the words and what they actually mean?
One of my aunties actually was killed during a Black Lives Matter protest last year.
And that's appalling. But have you tried thinking about what the word...
So when I first saw this video, I was like, let's do some research and see if someone, an English person was killed during a Black Lives Matter protest. I saw nothing of the sort. And the closest that I got was this Guardian article from October 31st, which mentioned that 25 Americans were killed during protests and political unrest in 2020. And this article lists the people who died and the circumstances where they died. And there's only one woman in this whole list. And it's Jessica Dottie Whitaker, a white woman, was shot to death in one July morning in Indianapolis. Her fiancé told media outlets that her shooting had been preceded by a tense argument with some passerby over the use of a racial slur in the statements Black Lives Matter versus all lives matter. But here's the thing. She was 24 years old. I think that's quite young for someone to be the auntie of what sounds like a middle-aged man or someone in his 30s at the very youngest. Maybe he has an American side to his family. But still, I think that someone, if they had links to England or Britain in general, that this would have been on the news. And I never recalled hearing about someone with ties to Britain who died in a BLM protest. So I think he's lying. I genuinely think he is lying.
What does actually mean?
I understand what they mean, and I agree with
what do they mean?
And well, they're saying that Black Lives Matter also matter. Black lives also matter. I understand that.
So why are you booing it?
Because of what I've just said about what I think about when I think of those words. Now,
if I walk into a room and you're kneeling, I don't get to tell you why you're kneeling or what you're showing support for. I get only to ask you. So we've asked the footballers why they're doing it, and they've told us, Tom.
Which I respect. And
well, you don't respect. The polar opposite of respecting it, mate, is booing it. I'm afraid it couldn't be a bigger U-turn or a more violent opposition to respect than the idea of booing something. So you don't respect it. You completely and categorically disrespect it. So let's just make sure we're using words accurately.
Absolutely. But it's, I think if you make a bold statement rather than just taking the knee every week, actually, I think I would respect it more. But it's just a...
So again, define bold statement. Why is he a white guy? I'm almost sure that he is white, is basically defining the way in which black people should protest. That is what I find the most arrogant and most white privilege aspect of these people complaining, because they feel that they're the ones who should decide how black people should protest. You know, this is basically like saying, like, British people in 1776 should have decided how Americans would protest in the colonies against taxation and representation, right? It wasn't up to the Americans to decide how they should do that. And literally every single protest falls back on this idea of the people who are opposed to what the protesters stand for will never agree to the way that they are protesting it. Never. Whether it's workers in a union striking, I'm sure the bosses will think that that is not the right way to protest. They should, start a petition inside the company and send it to the HR department so that they can fold it 10 times and throw it in the bin. The whole point is that they don't want to do anything. So it's incredibly arrogant. And seriously, if black people are protesting, we should not be in the position to determine how they should protest. And we should not be in the position of saying it's gone on far enough, as a lot of people have claimed about the kneeling. That's not for non-black people to decide.
Complete, politically correct statement done.
But again, you're telling them why they're doing it, and they're giving you a very different answer to that question. So what do you think qualifies you to say, I know that's why you say you're doing it, but I know better?
Again, this is back to the argument that I said that Nigel Farage was using, and all the other ones are using, that this is really an ulterior identity politics agenda. Whereas, fine, then you're basically promoting also a fascist agenda, a racist fascist agenda. I have grounds to argue that, if you're going to use that argument, and with more evidence than they have. Because last time I checked, the England players were not avowed Marxists at all. I'm pretty sure they're pretty capitalist.
Well, again, that's your opinion. For me...
No, you boo them. They've told you why they're doing it, and you're booing them for completely different reasons.
But then that's my opinion.
Your opinion is that you know better than them as to why they're kneeling. You claiming it was my opinion a minute ago.
I've read what they said about why they're kneeling. I've been going to England games for 10 years, home and away. I'm going next week to Croatia at home. I'll be at all the Euro games, and I'm also going to Qatar next summer. What do you think? What impact do you think it has on the players when they get booed by their own fans before the game starts? Do you think it might G them up a bit? Honestly, I think that part's bad. And I'm one of the people that do it. I think it's bad because England are going into a major tournament, and we're basically the biggest story at the moment is the fact that there's a divide between the fans and the players.
Well, some fans, mate. I think you got drowned out by the majority. Just a small proportion of fans who many people think are racist, but I presume you reject that description.
I'm absolutely outright not racist, but
but you boo the Black Lives Matter kneeling.
I believe that black.
But you're definitely not racist.
Sorry.
What do you think the word support means?
Support what in what context?
Any context you want.
Getting behind, isn't it? Encouraging.
Yeah. So you're there to actually make them play worse, are you?
Well, no. I spent probably our best part of 50,000, 60,000 over the last 10 years following in home. I was in Russia 2 years ago.
Yes, but we're talking about yesterday. I mean, by booing.
But he's not a racist at all. And I like I said, I'm convinced that a lot of people, I don't know about him specifically, but a lot of people who have these views in Britain, and like I said, this is a difference between Britain and the US. I think they've deluded themselves into thinking that they're not actually racist. Their bar for racism is set so high that anyone who isn't that, practically a former SS officer in charge of running a death camp, then you're not racist. And I noticed this in ways even in people who. So this is an extreme example because I do think that whether or not this person is racist or not, he definitely sounds right wing. But I get a sense in Britain that there's also a lot of people who might actually think that they're very liberal and very cosmopolitan, but in practice are actually quite racist. And like I said, right wingers will always for example, manifests this subtle racism in ways of like, I'm not racist, but colonialism, the British Empire was a positive. We built the railroads in India, and they'll justify positions like this. And if you make a list of things that these people believe in, and then things that actual racists like neo-Nazis believe in, and you'll see almost a perfect match. The only change is the words that they use, the discourse, the rhetoric. And I see this all the time. But I still think there's also a lot of people who think they are, liberal, left-leaning, cosmopolitan, to use the word that a lot of Brexiteers use, kind of the metropolitan elites, who are also actually very racist, and they just don't realize it. They're absolutely deluded. And I see this in Britain more than I've seen it anywhere else. And the best example that I have of this is there was a show, sadly it's ended, called Chewing Gum. It was a show that was written and starred Michaela Cole, who's really funny. She's really good. And there was a scene in one of the episodes where she is dating a white kind of middle class British guy. She's black, by the way, and she's dating this white guy, middle class Londoner, which you assume will have fairly liberal views on race. And at some point, he basically asks her to dress up, with a traditional, like a sexy African dress, and start dancing an African dance for him. So he's basically, he's probably deluding himself that he's not racist because he has a black girlfriend or dating a black girl, and yet he's completely fetishizing, the African aspect of it. And I know this is just a series; it's fiction, and that's the scene. That's her. You can tell that the guy's white. And she's basically forced to dance for him, wearing that, which I'm sure would be incredibly humiliating for someone. And I found that scene not only hilarious, but so representative of this kind of, I'm not really racist if I want my girlfriend to dress up this way and dance this way. But it is. It is incredibly racist. And again, there's a whole spectrum in which all of this manifests itself. And it applies to left and right. But Britain is an insane, and Boris Johnson once said, Britain is not a racist society. Yes, it is. It's insanely racist. And I would definitely say, you can compare the numbers, in terms of actual racist violence. A country like the US is on a league of its own in the Western world. But in terms of the subtle manifestations of racism, Britain really, really, really has a long way to go. A long way to go. And, this booing incident is a perfect example of this. This also happened in the US when Colin Kaepernick was doing it. But to do it to the national team, at least in the US it was the NFL. But to do this to the people who are representing your national team, the fact that you can be successful, more successful than you were in the past, because now you have really good black players and they win trophies for you, like France, who won in 1998 with a multi-ethnic team, and then won again in 2018 with an even more multi-ethnic team. Well, how many white guys were there in the French team in 2018? 3, 4? And so you credit them, you hate the fact that these people have fought for their rights, for their ability to integrate into society, and they end up becoming footballers, and they win trophies for you. They win World Cups for you, and you own those victories. But you completely dehumanize the struggle that led them to be there. And yeah, that is wrong in so many ways. These people should not be booed at all. And the final point that I want to say is also perhaps a slightly controversial point. I'm all for people kneeling during the anthem, during whatever, in support of Black Lives Matter, whatever. I'm slightly cynical in that this has an effect. I think it was much more powerful back in 2016 when Colin Kaepernick started doing it. I think it's much less effective now. And I'm also very much opposed to, like, as I said earlier in this video, to like woke, the corporatist manifestations of wokeness. You know, all these companies putting like rainbow logos during Pride Month, but not in their Middle East subsidiaries. You know, all these, the Nike, like, I lost a lot of respect for Colin Kaepernick the moment that he signed a deal with Nike to kind of promote his struggle through Nike, because I don't think that corporations are genuinely committed to any of this. I think it's all a sham. I think it's just done to make more money. So I am a bit cynical in how this can be taken over in ways that doesn't really lead to the objective that it was originally intended for. But again, I am not one. I'm not one to say that this has gone long enough. I'm not one to say that they shouldn't do it at all. And I do think that the difference between what they're doing is that these are the players, and the coach agreeing to do this. It's not, like I said, it's not the FA organizing this. It's not some other corporate interest. It's the players themselves doing it. And they should have the right to do it as long as they want throughout the entire competition, throughout any future competition. And this needs to go on for another 4 or 5 years or 10 years or wherever, until the moment that you don't need to do this, because black people and minorities finally can live in a society where they do not face systemic discrimination, harassment, or death, which is by far the worst manifestation of this. Until then, that is the moment when it's gone on too long. And ultimately, it's only for them to decide when that is. So, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, please share. Most importantly, please subscribe. And thank you very much.